So you might have individual thinkers in a state of slavery, but for the populace as a whole to be intellectually alert doesn't happen. So in Soviet Russia, you might have individuals, very small select groups, which, by the way, were preferentially treated in the extreme, had their own towns and their own stores and stuff, and didn't have censorship on them, and were allowed to have foreign publications, just like they lived in a little town in America somewhere. In the far extreme, they had special treatment. Yes, you did have individual thinkers in Soviet Russia. How did they get the first thing to go around the moon, the first man in space? How did they beat us on anything at all, ever, if they didn't have anyone over there that could think? Sure they did. But the populace as a whole is incredibly religious and superstitious to this day. It was a passing fancy of the Soviet era that they were atheists. They weren't. They never did convert to atheism. And now they don't trust science. So the whole people as a whole cannot be intellectually active in a state of slavery. Only a free people can be intellectually active on the whole. Now he says when controversy is avoided, when there are beliefs and we're not to question beliefs and we leave principles alone, we don't question principles, we believe what we're told, then in these types of situations, these societies, you do not get the impulse that raises even the most ordinary intellect to something of a dignity of a thinking being. So if you want the ordinary people to be raised to the dignity of a thinker, you have to have a culture where you can question things, where controversy can thrive, where there isn't something handed down from on high that we have to accept, where you're allowed to offend and fight about things and argue and disagree. That is where you can get, quote, something of the dignity of thinking beings for the ordinary man on the street, the ordinary intellect. Can the masses ever be educated? To what extent they can be, to the extent that they can be, it's only possible in a culture which thrives on controversy and argument and debate and possibly even offending people. God forbid. Now, he mentions an attitude which is very much like the emotionalism we see in the American schools today, the American educational establishment, where they ask people what their opinion or their view is. What do you think of it? And we're not to criticize or question, and we're not even to try to make the person explain why they believe that. We're certainly not to make them justify it or ask them to justify it. No, you have your beliefs, and they are incontrovertible. Nobody can question them. No one can criticize them. That's what I believe, though. Well, so let's hear what he has to say a bit here. There is a class of persons who think it enough if a person assents undoubtingly to what they think true, though he has no knowledge whatever of the grounds of the opinion and could not make a tenable defense of it against the most superficial objection. So there are some people who think that that's okay, and there are some people like that who do that, who think that their view is good enough, damn it, and you don't have to, to hell with you if you question their view or try to get them to defend it. So now he's talking about the group of persons who thinks that that's an okay way to go about it, and then there's the group of people that go about it that way. Well, such persons, the ones who think it's okay to go about it, in other words, the intellectuals who spread this sort of attitude, the intellectuals who go around encouraging people to just have floating opinions and to stand by them to their death, these type of intellectuals, if they can once get their creed taught from authority, they naturally think that no good and some harm comes of its being allowed to be questioned. So they won't even allow that doctrine to be questioned if they can get it in a place of authority. And the doctrine that they won't let be questioned is the doctrine that your beliefs cannot be questioned. So that is what we are dealing with in the schools in the United States today. Lisa Van Dam mentioned this when they were doing essays about what a painting meant to the kids, and they had lessons about the historical meaning of this painting, and I think they had read some story that was involved with it or whatever. And then the kids were asked to write an essay on what the painting meant. And this little girl who was new to the school wrote that the painting was beautiful, as all art is beautiful, even if it's just a smudge on the canvas. And Lisa Van Dam called her up to her desk, and she said, "Can you give me one bit?" Oh, crap! It was a poem. Forget that, it was a poem, not a painting they were looking at. And this poem, they were supposed to talk about the meaning of the poem. And the girl says that the meaning of the poem is that all art is beautiful, even if it's a smudge on a canvas. Lisa Van Dam says, "Can you give me one bit of evidence from the poem that supports this view, that all art is beautiful even if it's a smudge?" And the girl didn't know how to go about thinking, actually. All she was able to do was just regurgitate what she had been told was her opinion. She was told that her opinion should be that all art is beautiful, even a smudge on a canvas. So when she's asked her opinion about what this poem about art means, she says, well, it means that all art is beautiful, even a smudge on a canvas. She can't even think. She can't even put a thought together. All she was able to do was regurgitate what she had been told she should think. We're thick into that today. It's a terrible situation. Now he says that to shut out discussion entirely is seldom possible. So some basic discussion does get in. And when it once gets in, beliefs not grounded on convictions are apt to give way before the slightest semblance of an argument. So when you've made it immoral and illegal to argue about things, but then some bit of argument does happen, or all of a sudden the veil is lifted and it's legal to argue about it now, like in Soviet Russia when the Soviet Union fell apart, all of a sudden the slightest semblance of an argument can change people's minds, because they weren't convinced of this thing before. It was just the floating received opinion that you weren't allowed to question. Now, in post-Soviet Russia, science crumbled because people weren't convinced of it. They didn't understand why. They didn't know it. Science comes from freedom of thought. They didn't have any of that. They didn't trust science. Science was of the state, of the authority. Therefore, when the state and the authority are gone, we can all relax and forget about science. And the 1990s saw the greatest swelling of mysticism and religions and cults in Russia. Not cults in the American sense, like the Kool-Aid cults that killed themselves and stuff. Not like that, but like priests getting people. I've read stuff about it, and it's really terrible. Very, very religious situation in Russia right now. Curing people with magnets and stuff. Very bad situation. Because their beliefs were never grounded on conviction. It was simply received opinion. And I can only hope that the American emotionalism is as fragile as that. Wouldn't it be lovely if all this obsessive belief in the beauty of modern art and the beauty of non-rhyming poetry and how all cultures are equal to America, what if all that could crumble as easily as the belief in science in Russia crumbled? That would be lovely. I'd love to see that. If the cultivation of the understanding consists in one thing more than another, it is surely in learning the grounds of one's own opinion. If coming to understand something is of one thing only, if there's one way to come to understand things, then it's understanding the grounds of your opinion. You cannot come to understand something by just having an opinion on it. Holding an opinion is not sufficient. To return to the thought about the Americans who think they can just hold an opinion, and you can't question their opinion. Quote, whatever people believe, they ought to be able to defend against at least the common objections. Now this is why I cannot take the attitude of people who just want to talk and discuss, and they never want to argue, and they don't want to debate,